what would be the top culprits for a person to be aware of that perhaps might be on their skin right now, or they may be breathing in their house, flame retardants, like the forever chemicals, like all the different things that we might be utilizing that we just see as being very benign. What would be like the baseline kind of, okay, let's just get rid of this just as a standard?
Well, recently, both Consumer Reports and the Environmental Working Group have looked at glyphosate in fast foods and common foods that we eat, and these forever chemicals, these plastics, these microplastics, these phthalates, these BPAs, and they're endocrine disruptors. They actually really disrupt our endocrine system, and there's a lot about it in Gut Check. But these things are now ubiquitous. They're in almost all of our fast foods. Shockingly, they're in almost all the foods that we eat. We used to worry that, there was a great paper that women who ate a lot of boneless, skinless chicken breasts when they were pregnant gave birth to boys who had smaller penises. True.
I think that's what happened to me.
Poor
I was
guy.
a big chicken fan.
And
she should have been eating ruminants.
It was the phthalates that were doing it. Right. Well, now, so phthalates are in plastic wrapping. Good news, there aren't any phthalates in Ziploc bags, interestingly enough. So if you're going to use a plastic bag, and I have no relationship to Ziploc, maybe they'll be on the phone and say, hey, we love you, man. Yeah. So they don't have any phthalates. Glyphosate is everywhere. It's sprayed on all of our grains. It's no longer just for GMO products. It's sprayed on wheat. It's sprayed on corn. It's sprayed on soybeans. It's sprayed on, you name it, it's sprayed on it. Oats, to kill the plant so it's easier to harvest. Yeah. So, and it's in a lot of our organic foods. And that was actually one of the reports that came out today. These things are in our organic foods, so it's hard to be safe anymore. But you're better off anytime you can get organic as a start.
Well, what can we do as a prophylactic from like a dietary perspective or from any other perspective? It's just as like a protective measure, since most of these endocrine disrupting chemicals are so ubiquitous if you do live in a modern culture.
Here's the good news. When you look at super old people, late 90s, early 100s around the world who are thriving, and look at their microbiome. And their microbiome is full of xenobiotic eating bacteria. Xenobiotics are these compounds that we just talked about. We, unfortunately, have lost all of those bacteria that want to eat this stuff. Believe it or not, there are bacteria that can eat oil spills. Bacteria just want to eat carbon atoms, and oil is full of carbon. It's a petrochemical, and all of these plasticizers are petrochemicals. They're carbon atoms. So we used to have a great system for eating these compounds. And what's really interesting is these super old people still have those bugs. Now, can you get them back? I believe you can. And part of Gut Check is, look, these guys have, number one, we've wiped them out in a really good way. We've napalmed our tropical rainforest of these bacteria. And we're basically, a dry desert compared to, for instance, these super great old people. But there's really cool evidence that we have these little pockets of really keystone bacterial species that live at the base of what are called crypts in our intestines. And they're there with a bunch of stem cells as well. And I argue that you can coax these guys out of hiding by basically dangling what they want to eat in front of them. And one of the things that's solely missing in our diet that our great-grandparents used to eat on a daily basis is, and it sounds trite, they ate whole foods, but they ate foods whole. They didn't grind things up into a fine white powder like we do with most of our food. There were no processed, ultra processed foods. Those foods were full of prebiotic fiber, number one. And prebiotic fiber is what these guys like to eat. Right now, we don't give them anything that they like to eat. Number two, which is, I think, also really important, our ancestors made food that would preserve by fermentation. Whether it was fermentation of grains, whether it was fermentation of beans, whether it was fermentation of beer, wine, cheeses, yogurts. That was the only way to store things and to also, quite frankly, make foods edible and digestible. It turns out that that fermentation is really important to produce products that are called postbiotics that we now realize are probiotics, our friendly bacteria, have to have in addition to prebiotic fiber to make the compounds that we need to get these messages from these bacteria. And that was, and there's a great study. I didn't do it. The husband and wife team at Stanford, the Sonnenbergs, did it. And I think it's a real eye opener for any of us. A lot of us have been told, oh, you got to eat your fiber. You got to have prebiotics and, all this roughage, and that's what they want to eat, and you'll be fine. So the Sonnenbergs took a bunch of humans, and they gave them a ton of prebiotic fiber. It was inulin for those who were interested. Great prebiotic fiber. And they looked at their inflammation markers, and they looked at their gut microbiome diversity. And the more diverse your microbiome is, the more species, the more teeming tropical rainforest it is, the better in every aspect. They gave them all this fiber, didn't change their biodiversity, and didn't change their inflammatory markers. And they go, well, that's interesting. We're giving them what they want. So the second group, they gave them the same prebiotic fiber, but this time they gave them fermented foods. In the case of the study, it was mostly yogurts and kefirs. But it could be sauerkraut. It could be, believe it or not, vinegar as a fermented food. Believe it or not, coffee, tea, and chocolate cacao as a fermented food. Good news. And they gave them that with the prebiotic fiber, and lo and behold, their gut diversity bloomed and their inflammatory markers plummeted. So it was, you gotta have, it takes a village. And I talk about the steps you gotta go through in the book to get these guys to come out of hiding, give them the precursors they need to build better compounds that start communicating with your brain and foster these friendly bacteria coming out of hiding. And I still see patients 6 days a week, and that's what we do. And the changes are remarkable. And this book is, here's what I've learned since I published The Plant Paradox almost 7 years ago now. And 80% of my patient population now are people with autoimmune disease and a wiped out gut microbiome and leaky gut. And we can rebuild this step by step. And the book tells you how to do it.
Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. If you did, feel free to tag us on the Instagram. You can find me at Aaron Alexander on there. Also check out the YouTube channel that is at Align Podcast. Subscribe over there so you get each week's videos and instructional content. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for reviews. Thanks for doing you. I'll see you next week.